Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. Thanks for sharing your time with us. We really do appreciate that. I want to thank Ken Quiethawk for that amazing intro. Please check him out on the internet. He's a native storyteller, and he and his wife have managed to put an amazing body of material together that is quite profound, and it helps to show how cosmology and history can be shared through stories that can be passed generation to generation. It's an amazing talent and gift that they have, and I highly advise you to check it out. We're going to be talking tonight about an amazing book that I've just finished reading, which I loved, called Smell of the Universe, Miracles in an Age of Disbelief. Let me kind of give you a little bit on exactly what the book was about. You know, why is the universe smiling? The word miracle is rooted in a Sanskrit syllable, SMI, from which we get the English word smile. So a miracle refers to a smile induced by certain sensations of awe, beauty, and wonder. Humans have always had extraordinary experiences, often called miracles. An account of reported miraculous phenomena, Smile of the Universe, takes us beyond conventional religion and science to explore the outer reaches of human potential. Grounded in true stories and matter of fact, Michael argues for the reality of a great mind and for the human ability to communicate with that mind. In an age of disbelief, it presents a fact-based template for experimental spirituality and makes the case that every one of us, rightly understood, is a smile of the universe. He obtained his Ph.D. in philosophy from Columbia University and has taught philosophy and the humanities at New Jersey City University, City University of New York, and elsewhere. He is an artist and an independent scholar. He divides his time between consciousness research, miracle hunting, and painting. And among his many books are The Man Who Could Fly, St. Joseph of Copertino, and The Mystery of Levitation, Experiencing the New Next World Now, and Soulmaking. The book is a phenomenal book. If you're interested in miracles, this helps to explain them tremendously. I want to welcome Michael to the show. Michael, welcome to the show.
All right. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for that very nice introduction.
Well, you know, the book was really worth a lot more, but then I wouldn't have needed you here. So it's better to just give a little bit and let you take care of the rest. It is a fascinating thing, and probably everybody has thought about miracles from time to time in their life. You know, whether it's the miracle of a rainbow or the miracle of something happening right at the right time, or how would everybody has a different definition. So what was the definition that you were working from when you wrote this book?
Well, that's a good question. The main thing, the first thing is the word miracle itself has a nice rhetorical ring. It implies something extraordinary and something wonderful. And as you pointed out, the root of the word is smile. So we kind of smile with wonder when we hear an extraordinary story about something totally unexpected and totally rare. However, so that's the subjective part. But in a more technical sense, I'm interested in experiences that we would call miracles for the reason that they cannot be explained in terms of scientific materialism, or for that matter, any science that we know today. So, and these are called anomalies. So anomaly is not as nice a word as miracle, but it's the same thing. But the miracle has a more positive side. The anomaly suggests breaking a law, and that's not true. Miracles don't break laws. They simply seem to imply new laws. So St. Joseph of Copertino, when he levitated, he wasn't violating the law of gravity. He was under the influence of a force that counteracted gravity. In the same way, when I throw a baseball up into the air, I'm not violating gravity, but that's a physical force. In the case of St. Joseph and levitation, we're dealing undoubtedly with a force, but with a mysterious force that seems to be related to certain states of mind. So that's the kind of approach that I'm using. I'm looking for information, worldwide patterns of information that suggest the limits of our prevailing scientific way of looking at the world, which is, science is great and it's useful and terribly important, and a weapon and an instrument of acquiring knowledge. But when it is too emphatically materialistic in its outlook and tends to shy away from phenomena that are primarily mental in their creative potential, that's where I get a little critical. So my sense then of a miracle is an astonishing and unusual or relatively rare experience, but essentially the key is that it cannot be explained physically. And that's important because it implies a whole other dimension of reality that we all actually know. We're acquainted with this other dimension of reality in our own minds. When you look within and you have memories and you have feelings and you have desires, or you have dreams or fantasies or hallucinations, they're all real experiences, but they're not physical. And they operate differently. They can't be measured in space and time in the same way our physical events are. So this is known as dualism. In other words, there are two kinds of reality. Ultimately, the two may be resolved into one, but that's scientists and metaphysicians and philosophers are working on that. But the important thing, what I'm trying to do in my book, is remind everybody, not just a few people, that we all possess abilities that are far more extraordinary than most of us would even realize. Unless we've done a little research, or unless we're lucky enough to have the experience, like various experiences, or witnessed them, as I have, it's harder if you haven't had any experiences like that. And also, if you've been raised in a modern university, the teaching is oriented around reductive materialism and not miracles of the kind that we're talking about.
Well, I think that one of the interesting things that you hit on was that, first of all, I totally agree with you. I think that all of us have the potential for all of the things that you have listed in your book that you have called miracles. But it takes it away from the brain and the fundamental, the physicality, into that element, that area that has not you can't touch it. In other words, your brain can't make a miracle happen. There's another source out there. There's another avenue, another place to go for the energy that creates the miracles. And in almost every case, they are they are a result of a spontaneity, of creativity, of some sort that enables the person to reach beyond what they think their physical limitations are.
Yes, that sounds right to me. In other words, there is, let's say, another dimension of reality that permeates us, but we're intimately related to it by means through our brains. The brain is clearly physical. When you examine your thoughts and your feelings, you can't measure them, you can't see them. They're private to you, although they become less private in cases of telepathy, right? When, if that happens, that suggests that at a deep level, our minds are connected. And so the whole challenge, in a way, here is to acknowledge that there is another dimension of reality with all kinds of unusual powers and capacities and potentials. So the question is, how do we crack through the veil or the brain barrier, as it were, to the deeper states of consciousness? And there's what you sort of touched on, that spontaneity, confidence that these things are going to happen in religion is called faith. After all, if your mind is constructed around inhibition, denial, if you put a wall up in your mind to certain kinds of reality, you'll shut them out. So there's a whole art, is a tradition that goes back to the ancient mystics and yogis of all ages and shamans, and they're always looking for ways to break down the resistance and open up the gates of consciousness to that greater world. And that's fairly simple. All cultures have figured out one way or another. Meditation, fasting, they all have stories that they tell that are designed to honor and open themselves up to these mysterious powers. And so this is an ongoing process, but we have forgotten our connection as a result of our highly technical and materialistic civilization, which has many benefits. I'm not putting it down. We're so absorbed. I mean, imagine you have all the distractions today, for example, of the mind. You've got a phone. I watch people walking up and down the streets, and they're staring at their phones. I can be having a conversation with a friend, and there's an issue comes up, whips the phone out, breaks the flow of the conversation, and 2 minutes later, that's the answer that we were groping for. I mean, it's a serious world of distractions everywhere. Unlike more traditional societies, poorer, if you will, sometimes, less advanced technologically, but societies which have traditions and methodologies that open themselves up to these creative energies in ways that we are, I think, as a more advanced technological peoples, are systematically shutting out or diminishing the possible effects upon us. I don't mean to sound too... Yeah, I think that's an unfortunate development.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I think that if you go way back in time, thousands of years, there were cultures, there were towns or gatherings. They actually had a group memory. They were able to communicate telepathically with each other, and it was just common. Everybody did it, and there was no need of other ways of communicating, and those qualities are still in us. It's a matter of getting rid of the drudge, the technology that we have thought was so advanced has really cut us off from our source of power within ourselves. I mean, especially, let's go back to Joseph, Saint Joseph of Copertino.
Copertino.
You want to explain to the folks about this? Because he was one of my favorite of the ones that you had in the book.
Yeah, well, St. Joseph of Copertino, we have Cupertino in California, by the way, named after him, where all the digital technology is. But at any rate, quite a difference, right? Now, Joseph was born in 1603 and lived 60 years in the 17th century. The 17th century was a century of scientific revolution. But it was also a century of mysticism in Italy and all over Europe, for that matter. But the thing about Joseph, he seems to have been born with a disposition to go out of his mind. I mean, that's sort of a funny way of putting it. A disposition to surrender, to become ecstatic. And when he was a boy, he would hear music in the distance while playing with the other children, and his mouth would open up, and he'd go into a trance. And so the kids called him Bocca Aperta, gaping mouth. That was his nickname. And they thought, and he gave the impression of being an idiot, because his mouth was opening, and he was going off in these incredible trances. He'd hear a bit of music, he'd see a bird, and the bird would remind him of the glory of God, and he'd get ecstatic. But from an early age, he had this disposition to ecstasy, to go out. Ecstasy means means out, stasis, standing outside of your mind and your ordinary mind and your ordinary body. He seemed to have had a biological disposition to that, I would say. But he also became deeply religious. And when he listened to religious music, especially when he prayed to the Madonna inspired him. He would go off into these states. And so he was so spaced out that he had a hard time getting into any religious organizations, because when they let him in, even temporarily, he blundered about because he was constantly falling into trances. And he'd just say God to him, and he was on his back, ecstatic. Now, you can't live in an organized religious society like that. So he was kicked out of his first attempt. But eventually people got the idea that Joseph was special, even though he was different in many other ways. So he was finally incorporated into a Franciscan group. He admired St. Francis, of course. And almost immediately, the first levitation that he experienced, that's different from the ecstasy. The ecstasy is the mental state. The levitation is the physical. But the first levitation that he is reported to have experienced was while he was standing in front of a painting of the Madonna. I've seen photographs of the Madonna, of this painting. And he lifted up into the air, and I don't actually know if other people were, I don't remember at this point if others witnessed this or he just reported himself. But this launched him on a career. I try to imagine this, Barbara. For 35 years, this was a guy that didn't occasionally have a weird experience. He was constantly he was unable to function in any normal capacity as a priest. For example, while saying confessions, he would sometimes get carried away and suddenly become mute and unable to listen and to carry on because he's so spaced out. When there would be, let's say, marches where there was a lot of dancing and music, if he was on the scene, he would get carried away and he would levitate. He would go up in the air, sometimes on a tree like a bird. He was seen hovering like a bird on a tree branch, and everything would stop around him because this was so extraordinary. He acquired a reputation. People from all over Europe came because he had a reputation not just being a spiritual acrobat, but to being a truly holy man with insights into people's lives. When he did listen to confession, if you left something out, he'd remind you. His mind-reading capacity was so extensive that it annoyed some of his fellow priests. He would always catch them while they were wandering from their prayers. and he'd sort of catch them out and say, "Hey, Brother Jones, come back to what you were praying and thinking. You were thinking about having dinner, some pasta tonight, weren't you?" And the guy, the priest would be embarrassed, say, yes, sorry. But eventually, his superiors said, "How about cooling it, Joseph? Leave us alone. Stop picking on us every time we have the wrong thought." That gives you an idea of the kind of psychic ability that this man had. And how did he have such a psychic? Well, partly it's a mystery. He had this disposition to go into altered states of consciousness, but he also had a tradition that taught him how to purify himself by fasting. He hardly ever ate. A lot of mystics, shamans, and yogis fast. They interfere with the ordinary functioning of the body in order to open up the gates to the higher mind. But the stories about Joseph are, I'll tell you one story that I kind of like. It'll illustrate vividly Joseph's abilities, but also his personality. People came from everywhere, and they wanted to see Joseph levitate like he was a show, and he couldn't stand that. And he couldn't stop himself. But he got a visit from a Spanish official and his the text says, vehement wife, who was so vehement she wanted to talk to Joseph face to face with this holy man. So his superiors told him, you cannot avoid this confrontation. You have to go and talk to these people. It's a Spanish viceroy. Spanish were occupying Italy at that time, so you can't mess around. So he said, okay. And as he approached the viceroy and his vehement wife to speak to them, he noticed behind them a statue of the Immaculate Conception, and that triggered a state of ecstasy, and so that he literally flew over their heads to embrace the statue. When he did this, the Spanish viceroy's wife fainted on the spot. They had to bring smelling salts out for half of the people that were with him. They were like so shaken up. And then after making contact with the statue, he flew back over their heads again and no longer felt obliged to talk to them because he had upset the scene so much. Anyway, that's the story about interesting story. Numerous people witnessed this. 150 sworn depositions of Joseph by 100 different people, including popes, all kinds of surgeons, doctors, all kinds of people who witnessed him levitate for a period of 35 years. And moreover, the 150 is just a fragment of the numbers of people who would have actually seen him levitate, because he was always out in the public. Saying when he said Mass, he would typically be 3 or 4 or 5 inches above the ground during the whole Mass, hovering there. And every now and then someone would come along and put their hands underneath and make sure they weren't being deceived. So Joseph was an extraordinary example of two things: altered state of consciousness and the strange abilities to do things that we call miracles. Levitation is only one. Many others I could cite about Joseph. He was a bilocator. He was seen, for example, in Copertino at his mother's bedside when she was dying. Everyone knew he was in Naples at the same time. And he was at separate places. Different witnesses from different parts of Italy at the same time reported seeing him. So it is a very unusual man. And there are lots of them in history. And one of the aims of my book, is to remind people that there is an enormous amount of information about extraordinary human abilities. And the more we learn about these abilities, I think the more we have to benefit. But there's a certain resistance, as you, I'm sure, are aware of, to confronting this material.
Well, I think that one of I think one of the things that people should really know, and your book goes way back in time and comes forward in time to even current events, that these things happen to people from all walks of life. They happen to people who are religious and who are not religious. And it's almost as though it happens, in spite of yourself. It's the things that you've cited in your book. None of these people were looking to develop any of these qualities. It just happened. So it's not. It's not that a magic wand was waved over individuals. It's something in their life permitted them to open themselves to a higher power, a greater mind, whatever. I don't want to use the term God because that's, to me, limiting. So it feels as though there is an energetic that we have as individuals that everyone can access if they so want to go within and sort of turn it on. It's like a smartphone. You have apps that you turn on and apps that you don't turn on, and it's the same way with these skills and these talents. I don't believe any of them have ever really been used for monetary gain. It's usually, even if you go way, way back to the Oracle of Delphi, or you go back to Fatima, or these people are very common, and that's not meant to be a derogatory term. It's they're everyday people, and because they have an ability and a talent and a skill, I believe they're demonstrating it has other people wondering, could I do this? How would I do this? What do I need to do in my life to open myself to these kind of skills and talents? And I think they've been, look at the Buddha, look at, some of the, look at Jesus, the disciples. Look at, it goes on and on and on, and especially in the 1800s, it feels like either there was not a lot of great news out there, or there was suddenly a surge of these kind of skills and talents developing in the 1800s. Because when I look back at some of the stories of the mediums and the clairvoyants and the seers and the oracles, there seems to be a big bunch of them there. But you can go back to Socrates. There are reports of unusual circumstances that happen to usual people, and it's out there today, and it's a matter of. Look at Joan of Arc. She had visions. Now, her visions came in dreams, and there were voices that talked to her. There is not a one of us out there that hasn't heard our name spoken, and there was nobody there.
Right.
I would have bet everybody has had that experience, and it's kind of like that's one of the first in my experience. That's one of the first things that happens to people when that element within them is beginning to open up. They, for some reason, hear their name called, and there's nobody around. And you go from there. If you just fluff it off and say, "Well, I was hearing things," then in a way you have said thanks, but no thanks this lifetime.
Yeah, well, it depends on what you're hearing too. If I once heard my name. That's the only time I had this kind of experience that you're describing. I heard a female very softly called Michael, and I definitely heard it. I was wide awake. I wasn't drunk or stoned, but that was it. And now, if she had continued and said, I got a message for you, Grosso. I mean, and that would have been more interesting, but that might have been just a little brain tweaking, some little something like a snatch of dream that suddenly bursts out of the brain into your consciousness for a moment. But it's how you react and what if it continues. I wanted to say something since you mentioned Socrates. I thought it'd be interesting to share with readers, to say a little bit about Socrates, because he's such an interesting case. Socrates is generally regarded as the founder of rational science and philosophy in the Western world. The ancient Greeks woke up to science and rationality in ways that no other ancient culture did. So that's all true. So Socrates is famous for his rational philosophical dialogues, which were recorded by his friend Plato. But it turns out that Socrates also had what we would call a guardian angel, but the Greek word was a daimon, spelled not D-E-M-O-N, but D-A-E-M-O-N, daimon. And the daimon is a good spirit. And it's well known from the literature and the dialogues and other people who wrote about Socrates beside Plato that Socrates every now and then would go into a trance, and sometimes for an entire day he'd be motionless, ecstatically thinking, lost in another world. The other thing is he had the voice would tell him never what to do but what not to do. In other words, if there was a danger, he would get it. And there's all kinds of stories of him getting like very trivial things, like if you go down that street, you're going to get a pig going to go wild and splatter mud all over you and your friends. He got that warning one day, so he told his friends, don't go that way. And they were laughing at him, and they all went, he didn't, and they were all splattered by a pig, by mud. I mean, that kind of thing. So he was a psychic and at the same time a brilliant, rational philosopher. That's an important message to the scientists today. There's no contradiction between having intuitive, psychic, and spiritual powers and having the finest rational and intellectual powers. So that's important. I mean, this is true for many of the great individuals of history. They were intuitive and they had good heads. They weren't, completely crazy.
Well, yeah, and I think also around the time of his death, when he was ordered to commit suicide, he said, well, my friend has not told me not to do this, so it must be my time to go.
That's right. That he took that the absence of the daimon's interference as proof that he should allow himself to be executed. He didn't commit suicide. They gave him poison.
Yeah.
But that's, yeah. So, yeah, that's an interesting part of the story. Absolutely. But,
I mean, to me, that was, everybody has those feelings from time to time to go here, to not go here, to do this or to not do this.
Yes.
And it's sort of like if you pay attention to these quote unquote coincidences, they increase in their frequency and their intensity, and it's sort of like it's another sense. It is the sixth sense, and to not develop it is to cut yourself off from a wonderful connection with a higher consciousness or a connection to a higher consciousness. And I love the great mind. It's an amazing gift that we all have, but you have to accept it. And I found that creative people, and I mean, you're an artist. You've dealt with getting into the quote zone when you paint, most probably. People who write get into a zone that is a level of meditative consciousness that opens you up to the potential you carry within. And, you know, I think one of my biggest frustrations this lifetime is that, you know, people don't use the talents and the gifts that they're given. They rely on other people or other groups to tell them what and how to do things. And it takes a lot of the magic out of the human existence, I think, personally.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a lack of confidence. Confidence, by the way, faith or confidence is one of those variables that is conducive. You have to be open, actively receptive to a possibility before something will happen. And so you're quite right. People who rely on others, I mean, it's good to rely on others when it's appropriate.
Yeah.
And, you're teaching me how to drive. So you put your foot on the brake, Mike, and that's how you stop the car. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Right? And so, of course, but then you have to decide where you're going to drive once you know how to drive that car. And so, yeah, we are timid. There's a timidity. And this has to do with education. I mean, if you're lucky enough to be born into a family, my family was not educated, but they tolerated my ideas and said, I was the first one to go to college. So they didn't even know what college was. And but they said, okay, we'll help you out as best we can. And then I had an older brother who was more knowledgeable about literature, and suddenly there were books in the house that on literature. And so I had the opportunity to start reading poetry very early on. And then I found myself writing poetry. So on the other hand, if you're in the wrong house and you're too poor, the book is not there, the options are not there, you can be a latent genius. It's not going to be, without the spark, it's not going to come forth. So yes, it's important to remember the big picture here about the human adventure.
Oh, absolutely. And when you've gone into, especially some of the people that have had experienced the stigmata, and then they pass away, and there is the one thing that got me was in a lot of places you talked about the smell of sanctity. What is that?
Oh yeah, that is a very strange phenomenon, and Joseph was a star in this area, but it's very commonly reported, and not only in Catholic saints, but in all of religious traditions. But in the case of Joseph, because I know that in great detail, anything that he touched, a dirty piece of underwear with, or a T-shirt with blood on it or something, if he touched it and you touched it, it had healing abilities. So the story after story. I have a section in the book where I talk about this for healings that took place just by touching something that St. Joseph touched. Now, we don't know if that's just auto-suggestion or some kind of real super energy that's charged in the object itself. But the point about, so that, yeah, that's the healing. But you asked me about the odor of sanctity. All right, so I switched from the odor to the healing. Sorry, that was my little mental slip up. So the things that he touched would smell, have this beautiful smell, and I have a whole bunch of quotes in the book of people who say that they would wash a handkerchief that was touched by Joseph over and over again for years, and it would continue to have this supernatural fragrance. The people that describe what it smelled like, nothing that they knew, nothing familiar, but exceedingly beautiful and heavenly, and it had healing effects on people. It made them feel good. There was one guy who reports, he says, I tend to have a hypersensitive nose and I don't like smells. But when I smelled something that Joseph touched, I felt better. So this is quite an extraordinary phenomenon. And I happen to know somebody personally that was transformed by the smell, the fragrance of Padre Pio. But this is a little different story. But I do have a discussion of Padre Pio in my book, too. Padre Pio was definitely projected himself all over the place through his smell. And as I say, I know one person very well to whom that happened, and it changed his whole life. These things are happening, and they're quite mysterious and quite interesting.
Well, I think what I love about it is that in all of your examples, there was not a case of and they wrote a book and they went on the road and they publicized it. It's basically these are things that have happened to people. They've utilized their gifts to heal and to help other people, and they haven't gotten a monetary gain from it. They stay very humble, and that's an important part of having gifts like this.
I think yes, I agree.
The humility. The humility is something that I don't know. It makes the gift even more precious because they're honoring it by giving it away.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I see the humility as the absence of the ego that gets in the way. The humility is like the emptiness. The door is humility is opening the door of the psyche and saying, I'll take whatever you have, whatever whatever I can receive. But but there is, of course, an element of, a lot of these things are happening spontaneously to everyday people, like they're one-shot events. Then there are others that seem to have a more continuous supply of influx of the higher mind, the greater mind, whatever you want to call it. And these folks often, and there are many of them around today, maybe you and I have a little touch of that, right? Just by virtue of our interest in these things, that we have been touched by these unusual powers, and there's a feeling that we want to make it known, we want to develop it, we want to open the door further, we want to share it, right? And not just run away and say, an odd thing, I can't figure it out, but who cares, It's just it's a part of human consciousness unfolding to its full potential, and we need to think in those terms. And
I think that's really important what you just said, because there are countless musicians that talk about how they are inspired for some of their music, and they didn't ask for something, but suddenly something just came, and it's the same thing I would imagine with painting and painters. I know I did a deck of cards that were hand painted mandalas, and I'm not an artist, but there are like 500 of them out there. So it's like I often say, it came through me, it not of me, and I think this happens to everybody at some point in time in their life, and they don't know what to make of it. So, maybe I better not talk about this because people will think I'm nuts. And happily, society today, doesn't judge the way it used to. You're not going to get burned at the stake, or nobody's going to try to drown you to see if you can fly or anything like that. But it's an amazing time because people are really open to these kind of gifts, and everybody was given it was in, how sometimes when you start a project or you have a class or whatever, you get that initial package of things you're going to need during the course. Well, all of these tools were in the initial package we got when we incarnated into this lifetime, and it's a matter of trusting it and welcoming it. but then, I mean, that goes for clairvoyance, clairaudience, and all of the other stuff. That's kind of standard operating material. But then you get to the things like, let's take Fatima. How do you explain Fatima?
Oh, all right. No, well, Fatima is definitely one of the most baffling phenomena. I mean, there are two major points about the Fatima story that blow my mind. Number one, on the first occasion that the three children encountered a Lady of Light, or maybe it was the second occasion, because on the first occasion she told them to come back to the same spot for 6 months, every month. On the second occasion, when the children came back and explained how when they told everybody about what they had seen, they were told that the children should ask the lady to prove it, show us something, give us a sign. And the lady responded, as you must know, that on the last of the 6 months, which turned out to be October 13th, 1917, on that day, something would happen that everybody would see and would convince them of the reality. So number one is that 6 month precognition, because it was a precognition. Because on that date, you must know the story. I'll just repeat it, the details very quickly. On that date, 70,000 people showed up in the expectation that something extraordinary was going to happen. Those who believed, those who didn't believe, and there are great numbers of them, skeptics who tried to tear these kids down and prove they were crazy or liars, they were there too. At 12 o'clock, which was the time that this event was predicted to occur, it was ringing like mad in Fatima. Suddenly, the sky cracks open and the clouds spread open, and one of the children, I think it was not Jacinta, or maybe Lucia actually, looks up into the sky and says, "Look." And everyone looks up, and the sun appears. Now, mind you, it appears to be moving. It appears to be a disk, which then, in its movement, but by the way, in the meantime, when that sky opened, after the rain, all the rain there dried up instantly on the ground. But what happened was that this disk of light that was superimposed over the sun and was taken to be the sun, obviously wasn't. If the sun shook up, we'd be toast. But the something over that sun, disk-like, came shooting down toward the 70,000 people in a zigzag motion, terrified them. There were photographs of people looking up in utter horror. And then it went back up in a zigzag motion and disappeared into the sun. Now, that was a totally fantastic event, but the interesting news is that it has all the properties of a classic UFO. UFOs move in these zigzag movements, and the UFO researchers have grabbed on to the Fatima story and suggested that there's some kind of UFO connection. So I don't know what the heck happened that day, but it's one of the most mysterious events in human history as far as I'm concerned. Why?
Well,
you had 70,000 witnesses. 70,000.
Wasn't it also pouring rain on them, and when this whole thing was over, they were all dry? None of them were soaking wet?
Exactly. And people were healed. It was seen for many miles away. So it was something objectively real, totally incredible and impossible, meant to strike awe into 70,000 people. And by the way, it was not paid. No one paid attention to it in America because the World Series were on, and how could, who cares about a miracle when you've got the Dodgers winning the World Series or something, whatever the heck was happening. So, but that's a pretty amazing story. And so, yeah, if anybody, that certainly qualifies as a miracle.
Well, one thing, absolutely, I'm not saying it doesn't, but one thing that nobody, that I know of yet has talked about is when you get group energy and group dynamics, and 70,000 people is a lot of energy focused on one thing, on one direction. You could change the weather pattern.
Possible, yeah. No, I agree that many of these phenomena seem, in some instances, to be a byproduct of some kind of group dynamic. But something like that. It's either that or it's some other agency. It's some kind of co-creative process. But I mean, if I had the answer to that question, but you're right. That's a definite possibility of that. There's some kind of what I call, I've written about this, paranormal group dynamics, and we know that a seance, a group of people together, can cause a table to levitate.
Oh, sure.
By the way, you were interested in levitation. I wanted to mention, as I do in the book, that one of the things that got me interested in levitation is an experiment that I performed in a classroom with another teacher and about 30 students, and I won't repeat the details, but in which we levitated a 200-pound ex-Marine up into the air simply by 4 women touching him, just touching, not pressing. This is the way you touch a Ouija board. Yeah, exactly. Just like as you're touching it with a Ouija board. You touch the target, and you feel it move. It moves. I mean, I've done it. I'm sure you've done it. And, well, this guy weighed 200 pounds, and when I said lift, and the girls stretched their hands straight up in the air, he went up into the air.
Yeah.
Barbara, I will never forget the look on that man's face. I can still remember it. 30 years ago, right? Of utter astonishment. Well, I was astonished. I never expected it to happen, and it never happened again. I tried it several times. It might, in the future. But, so there you go. I witnessed myself. I conducted a levitation.
I've done table tapping, and I can sort of explain it as far as energetics. I'm in this field. I believe in all of this, but there are times when I look at things and I can explain something energetically that has nothing to do with the paranormal. It's just an energetic thing, and well,
it could be a paranormal energy.
Oh
right?
yeah, absolutely.
In other words,
yeah, I wanted to also go into the oracles because you make a big distinction about, psychics and mediums and oracles, and you do make a distinction between them.
I'm not sure what oracles are the ancient Greek oracles, or
the Delphi guys.
Yeah, well, those are more place oriented, whereas modern mediums tend not to be attached to a particular place. That would be one difference. But to be honest with you, Barbara, I don't know. I don't remember the distinction I made there. I see them all.
It had to do with the oracles. They were bringing forth materials, answers for. And the oracles, especially at Delphi, it was politicians, kings, and it was very, very affluent
practical
people that went to the oracle at Delphi. But their mutterings had to be interpreted to give the quester the information they needed. Mediums don't use someone to interpret for them.
Yes, that may have been the case, and but the fundamental, the similarity, there are variations in styles and methods. I mean, some mediums, for example, physical mediums require darkness to perform, and that immediately suggests to some people, they need the dark so that they can play tricks on us. I don't believe that. The dark, I think, getting into the dark, what a medium is doing is in a sense creating the atmosphere of a dream, getting the distraction. The sunlight can be very distracting. It wakes you up, whereas the darkness, your mind tends to operate more effectively. On the other hand, there are mediums and saints and yogis and experiments that have been done in broad daylight. So it's not an absolute. The thing about the paranormal universe, in my opinion, at any rate, it's so many variations on a theme, and there's nothing absolutely rigid or certain. There's always an element of fuzziness around the edges of these stories that sometimes, in other words, is never absolute total consistency. But that's all right. People are not totally, absolutely consistent. We're not robots. That's understandable.
Yeah.
I mean, every artist uses a brush differently and gets different effects, right? So it's the same thing with the psychic universe. Lots of variety. And, I guess that was the point. That can be confusing. You would say, well, why is some mediums require the dark and others don't, you see? And why do some painters like to drink whiskey and others smoke weed, or others say a prayer or something before they start to work, right? Everyone has a different style of...
Well, I think that's one of the very, very, nice things about your book. You go into all different... modalities and all different ways of approaching the modalities, and some do use a hallucinogenic of some sort that takes them into that place. I know Aleister Crowley experienced. He experimented with a lot of different hallucinogenics, seeking for the source, or seeking for a way to get to the higher mind within himself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's it's different strokes for different folks, actually.
Exactly.
One of the things that one of your chapters was, living by miracle. You want to explain what that is? I thought that was beautiful.
Oh, well, right. That was a phrase. I quoted a phrase from the great English poet, William Blake. He says, as for me, I live by miracle. It's kind of an ironical... rhetorical way of saying that he's tuned in to the divine. So that was, living by miracle. But what I asked myself the question, what are the psychological variables that open us up to this more extraordinary world of the miraculous, of the unusual? And so I come up with several variables, but what they all come down to is the openness of the mind. There is introversion, getting deep inside yourself, also having some kind of belief system that opens you up. And then the two other variables that I mentioned are the what I call telic thinking. In other words, if you have a goal before your mind, the goal is often all you need to stimulate the effect that you're desiring. And what the physicist Helmut Schmidt discovered with his experiments with PK, he said people who succeed with the PK experiments, they don't try to analyze how they're going to get that result that they're aiming for. They don't think about the how. They just think about the end state, the goal itself. They focus on that. That's really, it's like magic. See, science goes step by step. Magic leaves all the intermediate steps out. But psychologically, what he's saying is, don't try to figure it out. Just be confident that the thing that you're imagining in the future, the goal of the whole process will be fulfilled. So, and then the fourth variable that's where there's a lot of experimental evidence to support this, suggests that the more spontaneous, the less rigid your mind is. Again, it's a way of being open. It's a way of opening the gates, and so spontaneity the more rigid and your mental habits are, the more habitually driven you are, the more mechanical your mode of life, and the less likely you're going to be open enough and elastic enough to be a vehicle for some extraordinary, interesting breakthrough. But even there, I would never say no. Never say no opinion of mine in this field is absolute, except that it's real. The stuff is real, okay? But everything else is up for grabs. It's nuanced, and if you're looking for simple, clodhopper smashing simple truths, go somewhere else. Do a crossword puzzle. But if you're going to explore this realm, you have to be very subtle and open to all kinds of possibilities. And anyway, that's just my take on it.
No, you're absolutely, as far as I can tell, you're absolutely right, because certainly I tell people to keep journals of the coincidences that happen in their lives, because it's their higher consciousness trying to get through to them. And the more they recognize them, the more they understand that there is a greater mind, a higher power, there's something else at work. And I, can I tell you exactly what it is or where it comes from? No. But I've been in this field for over 50 years now, and I've never had a bad experience. So, maybe once. But that's once in 50 years. That's not too bad. And the reality is, trusting yourself to go with your gut, as opposed. Analyzing everything is wonderful, but there comes a time where you have to trust another part of yourself to help make choices and decisions. And the more you trust, the more you know something is right, the more it becomes right. And I think people who have a creative flow are more likely to flow into this kind of performance, if you will. And it does feel as though those who have an academic background and are rigid within that background, will fight the spirituality. Now, if you have an academic background and you have a spiritual philosophy as well, then you're loaded for bear. And, while you're going to question things, you're also going to be able to accept things that you can't prove but that you know are right. You've gone into, in the book, so many different forms of miracles. And, there are big ones and there are little ones. And I think the ones that I am very impressed with are some of the healings that have taken place. Physical healings where major illnesses have been cured overnight. When a healer came in and worked on the people, and quite often when a healer comes in, it's someone from not always, but often it's a healer from a very an indigenous one that comes from nature rather than somebody who lives on Park Avenue. It's often someone from the forest or the highlands or whatever who has been living in nature, with nature, and is able to call on those energies to help the body come into a greater balance. The one story I found fascinating was a man who had, I think it was cancer, and a healer told him that a healer told him that a certain medicine would cure
yes,
him.
you're talking about yes, Mr. Wright. That was not his correct name. I'm glad you mentioned that. That is one of the most interesting stories I've ever come across in the medical literature, which demonstrates the power of belief. Now, Mr. Wright had cancer. He had cancers the size of oranges all over his body, and he was a dead man. However, he heard that there was a new medicine, Crabiazin, what it was called. Turns out to have been a horse serum. And there were some articles in the newspapers about this miracle drug. And this guy, Mr. Wright, got it into his head that he wanted to try this. For some reason, he fixated on that particular medicine, on that reported medicine. And so his doctor got it for him and gave it to him. And he not instantly, but within a few days, all the cancer disappeared. And he went out and left the hospital, and for several months carried on his life. He was flying planes, I remember the story, and living a perfectly good life until he read an article in a newspaper reporting that Crabiazin was not a successful drug, and they were going to dump it. Immediately, the cancer returned. Goes back to the doctor and explains what happened. The doctor, by this time, figures out that this guy is just reacting to a placebo. It's his face that's doing it. So he says to him, look, I'm going to give you the what the article was misleading. They've been giving the wrong amount or the wrong, quantity of the serum. So I'm going to give you the correct quantity. So what he actually did is squirts water into his arm, just water. In other words, nothing. Again, it happens. Almost immediately, all the cancer disappears. He goes back to living his life. Now, you know how the story ends. A second time, after several months, he gets the news. Once and for all, scientists have decided it's useless. It's a worthless, non-effective medicine. Cancer comes back immediately, and within a few days, he dies. Now, somebody explain that to me. How can the sheer belief in nothing, there was nothing there that he was to believe in, just the belief itself kept him in perfect health when his belief, which is in his mind, changed, he gets the cancer and he dies. That is one of the most amazing stories that I'm acquainted with. And of course, placebo, we know placebos, for example, are almost as good as any medicine for depression. It's a matter of 1 or 2 points of difference in terms of effectiveness. So placebos are a universal healing agent, i.e. belief, trust, expectation, confidence, faith, whatever word you want to use, a positive attitude. And that's an important lesson. And I'm so glad you picked that story out because that's one of the most important and interesting stories I know of. And it's science. We have a scientific documentation. Yeah.
Well, and also for anybody who has ever been to a faith healer, in a church or whatever, and seeing them working, and I was able to work with a faith healer, to be there, not healing people, and it was fascinating. She was a singer, and she would use the music to build the energy. She would have people standing and clapping and jumping up and down and dancing, and when she felt the energy was strong enough, she would call people forward, and she would touch them, and because of the energy in the room and the people's belief that she was able to channel God into their bodies and cure them, I can't tell you the number of people that would walk out healed. Now, it and permanently healed too. I mean, not just it wears off in a week, but permanently healed. And it is amazing what a belief, an inner belief, can do to your body. Your body is far more powerful than most people believe. And these faith healers, they call themselves a faith healer. They're not saying that they're doing it. They're saying that God works through them. So, you know, it to me, but the energy in the room, you could feel the hairs on your arms standing up. It became so intense, and then of course, you know, people would fall on the floor, and other people would say, "Don't touch them; they're touched by spirit," and maybe. Or maybe they have gotten to that place inside of themselves that that's where they need to be. I think that utilizing the power that we have within us, and even given a placebo, like God has touched me through this person, therefore I am healed. It in many cases it can heal you. I mean the what do the doctors call it? It's almost, they have a medical term for it. It's sort of like, you know, the cancer went away, you know, for some reason it's unexplainable. A remission.
Right. Yeah.
But it's we have powerful energy available to us, and and it's sort of like, you know, you got a tool belt here. You got a lot of stuff in that tool belt, and if you utilize it, and you know, speaking from experience, I can tell you that having a creative outlet is really a good idea. That having a positive outlook on life, and finding the joy inside of yourself is the best fuel for making anything happen, and allowing spontaneity to be a part of your life as well. And at the very least, you'll have a richer life. At the very most, you can open doors and channels that will allow you to make amazing things happen within your own life. You're not possibly not going to, you know, manifest bread for the table and fish for the dinner, but if you're open to having miracles happen, they really do happen.
Well, it helps being open, and we have no idea how much we're closing out unconsciously. I mean, so much of our mental life is automatically operating independently of our intentions, but we can become more intentional and become more guide the forces in us in ways that will be more helpful rather than blocking and destructive. So yes, I think that this information of human potential needs to be spread in ways that it becomes more helpful and more. I mean, it does seem to me there's a lot of interest in consciousness nowadays. And a lot of people are on this wavelength and exploring.
Oh,
maybe
absolutely.
This thing that's just happened with that is happening now, the pandemic, I think is forcing many people into sort of more introspective. You know, that's one of the variables in the life living by miracle is an introverted life, and what's happening is we're being forced to become introverted. I myself don't mind it. I mean, I'm a little lucky because, you know, I have my own house and I've got, you know, something to do with my life. I mean, if there's no loss here. But so yeah, I just heard a beep, a sound. What was that?
No. It was my cat knocking a bell on the desk
table.
Oh.
It sounded like some kind of a.
No, my cat is becoming part of the show suddenly. I think one of the interesting things too that I found was, how were you introduced to the element of miracles? You begin the book with a very interesting story, which is really kind of cool.
Oh, seeing that particular miracle in Astoria, yeah. Well, but to answer your question, the real answer was not that particular incident, but how I got interested in miracles is my own experience, and I mean, I've had periodically throughout my life, beginning early in my life, precognitive, psychokinetic, telepathic, and a lot of other experiences that are strange and even difficult to characterize. So my own experience, and my mom was sort of interested in the Catholic saints, so I had these books lying around, and I would pick them up every now and then. And I remember there was one book she had talk about a healing. It was in 1954. A statue of the Virgin Mary started bleeding in the house of a woman and her husband, who were only vaguely religious, and were actually, the husband was a communist and anti-religious, but the woman who was pregnant and hysterical and sick in some ways was in the house when this statue suddenly started to bleed. Within a few days, it was a headline all over the world about this phenomenon. I won't go any further, but what I'm saying is my mom had a very well-written, interesting book about that in the house. So I picked it up and I started to reading. So then when I went on to study philosophy, I discovered that it was not intellectually proper to take ESP or miracles seriously, because the official, outlook of most academics would tend to be materialistic. So I realized that there was a problem here, that these people were obviously wrong, because I've had experienced these things. I knew that these things were real. And I said, these were my friends and my teachers, but it turned out that only few and exceptionally, open-minded academics tend to be receptive. The everyday people are receptive to the extraordinary because they don't have any mental blocks. But academics think they think they know how the world works, and they do know stuff. I'm not pretending that they don't know, but they have blind spots. One thing that's worth sharing with the listeners, I don't know about your experience, but I have friends who I've tried to open their minds a little bit in a gentle, friendly way. On several occasions, trying to get friends of mine open to the idea of life after death. And I remember on one occasion I had a book on mediumship by Alan Gold, one of the best books I knew on the subject. And I tried to give it to two of my colleagues where I was teaching in those days. I said, look, I got an extra copy. And this book is, Ph.D. in psychology, knows what he's talking about. You might find it interesting. I could not get either of those dear friends of mine to even touch the book. Well, I pointed the book at them, and they went, like a vampire, freaked out by, it's like holding a cross up in front of a vampire who freaks out. It was ridiculous. And I keep running into people that are like that today, and people that are my good friends, too, sometimes. The minds are shut. But, what we can do.
I definitely have experienced the same thing. but happily, there are a lot of PhDs that are, coming to the light side, so to speak, and understanding that it just enhances their practice by incorporating a different system as well, not instead of, but along with what they've got. Because, for instance, the element of a phobia can easily go to a past life. And rather than trying to hypnotize somebody out of being afraid of something, letting them relive their past life and understand where the fear came from alleviates it too. So you fix it in one sitting instead of 10. So and that's not the case in everything, but it is an example of how the two modalities together serve a greater purpose in healing a person than just trying to analyze them. The more modalities you bring in, the richer the service is that you render to the person. One of the other instances you talked about was the instance of Ganesh needing to be fed milk, and was it in India?
Yes. That's another. I have to say. I mean, boy, I had fun writing that book because I had to live with all these stories, and but that's one that first of all, I witnessed this miracle with my own eyes on CNN. One day, I turn on the television set, and there is a BBC reporter holding a cup of milk in his hand. And he's explaining how this is happening all over India and other places where there are temples, Indian temples dedicated to Ganesha, the elephant-headed god. And so there's a statue of this god. And what had happened, I'll just tell the story about the reporter. So the reporter explains how the people have been bringing milk to the statue, and the milk has been just disappearing, dematerializing. And, of course, that's a paranormal phenomenon, which I already know about. So he's going to perform an experiment, and he takes this cup of water, puts it underneath the statue of Ganesha, and the camera beams right down on the little cup of milk. I'm sorry, did I say water? Cup of milk.
Yeah.
This is a milk-drinking deity. And I can see it slowly disappear. It didn't spill, as the phony attempts to explain this away proclaim, that it was sucked up by something in some ridiculous attempt to explain it away. I could see the milk materialize. Now, then I read up on it, and it turned out later on, I have two of my students who were Indians, were in their temple when this happened. And one of them, they both brought me back written reports of their walking up to the statue with milk. And my one student, I still have his written report, explained how he went on the line 3 times to convince himself what he was watching was real. It was so mind-blowing. Went online 3 times, and each time he could see, just exactly I saw, the BBC reporter, the milk slowly evaporate into nothingness. Now, and that happened all over, wherever it happened in the United States, in Britain, and of course in India. The whole thing started when some Hindu man had a dream that Ganesha told me, "I'm thirsty, bring me milk."
Yeah.
So the guy gets that, goes, and he runs to the statue, and brings the milk, but the milk disappears. Everybody sees it, and before you know it, everybody around the world is doing it. Now that's another knockout of the story, an absolute knockout. And
it did also cause a milk shortage because everybody was. You can't make this stuff up. I mean,
exactly.
It's almost as though there are such massive demonstrations of an otherworldliness going on that it, how can people deny that something like that happens? I mean, it's impossible.
I agree, but the strange thing is this: how rapidly that amazing story just disappeared. There's no one. They're not talking about it. They're talking about baseball games or football or something endlessly. Some political item, which often can be important, but endless talk. Here's something that completely subverts our common sense view of reality. Something that should astonish scientists and ordinary people. Anybody with a brain should be excited hearing a story like this. But it disappears into nothing. I mean, that blows my mind more than the miracle. The miracle of human stupidity. Sorry, that's not the right word. Denseness, imperviousness, lack of imagination. I don't know what to call it. But again and again, that happens.
How about I think it was an Indian, the Dalai Lama asked somebody to change the weather because of a funeral, and the priest lit a huge bonfire and chanted for like 20 hours, and for that time frame, the rain all around continued, but not in the area where this celebration of a man's life was going on. So
that's right.
I mean,
that's another knockout of a story. I know I didn't ever meet him. His name was Barker. He was an anthropologist who witnessed it and described that he was disoriented for several weeks to see this thing happening. And by the way, here's another interesting point, Barbara, about that story. The monk who did the chanting, I don't know, I suppose he was a monk, religious figure. He didn't, you have to put a lot into these things. He chanted for hours and hours and hours. So when we play psychic games, let's say, and try to get tables to move or this and that, you've got to be prepared to invest the time. I mean, you can't expect things to happen instantly, and you got to work a little bit if you want to perform a miracle. I guess that's the lesson. But that's another completely astonishing story, and
and the thing is, and of course, then now that to me was a miracle. That to me, it changed the weather. And the Ganesh, absolutely. And then you come to people who walk on coals and things like that. And to me, that's mind over matter. That's not necessarily. I mean, it's unusual, but it's to me, I can explain that almost scientifically.
Well, there are attempts to explain it scientifically. By the heat creates a little sweat. I don't think so. I think you have a genuine psychic phenomenon here. It may be a little easier to explain or seem to explain or try to explain than something as amazing as, some of the other things we've just been discussing, Fatima and the milk miracle in India. But I would give it a little bit more credit. But I do see what you're driving at. It's a little easier to wrap your mind around that than some of these other phenomena, like the instantaneous, like the healing of Mr. Wright, for example. That's another one. That's just complete.
Well, I have not walked on coals, nor do I intend to. But I have met people that have. And
me too.
They do get you into a state of ecstasy to a certain amount. They get you into a heightened state of inner vibrational whatever, And I've seen people's feet. You know, they are totally unscorched. So but to me, you can put yourself into that frame of mind. You can get yourself into that zone, whether you're like, the dervishes. You know, they get themselves into a state of ecstasy by going around and around in a circle. I would throw up. But, you know, that's obviously not my mode.
Right.
But everybody, I think everybody has at least one way they can get themselves into that zone. Runners can do it. Bikers do it. I mean, there is that sense of putting yourself into another frequency of energetic. After all, we are electromagnetic beings. That's what runs our body. There is electricity here. So if you can get the electricity to rev itself up or put it to another frequency, you can be capable of doing a lot of things. Now, is that paranormal? It is above normal for sure.
It depends on. You know, again, you're right. There are borderline. It depends on how you want to even define paranormal. The fact that I can move my arm with a thought, or that I can, like Nijinsky, dance so beautifully just by my mind shaping my body, is in a sense inexplicable. How is a thought? I mean, we know our thoughts innervate our nervous system, and we know that electricity goes through the body and contracts muscles, and that's how it happens. But how can an intangible thought directly impact upon our nervous systems? That in itself is slightly puzzling.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are all kinds of boundary situations here where the phenomenon is unusual, but maybe not quite paranormal, and then there are degrees of paranormality. So there's a continuum of effects from the normal to the supernormal.
Going from that over to the fact that we can get ourselves into a different state of frequency or mind. How do you explain, and this, I would consider this almost magical and miracle-ish as well, automatic writing, where you are tapping into another level of your own consciousness that speaks with a higher degree of beauty and poetry. I have written poetry this way. I can't rhyme, not with a darn, but when I get into that place inside of me, I've published a book of poetry, but it wasn't done in the here and the now. It was done from another level of awareness. So this is something that everybody can learn to do. This is going from your consciousness to your higher consciousness to your attachment to cosmic consciousness, if you want. You can bring information through, you can bring wisdom through, you can bring philosophy through. It won't tell you what to do or how to do it, but it will give you beautiful material to live your life by. Now, to me, that's a miracle.
Yeah, I agree that the access to the miracle domain, as it were, is there are so many pathways, so many ways to edge ourselves into this realm of magic and strange power. I mean, there is just talk about falling asleep. I mean, and you know, the hypnagogic state. I happen to have a knack for prolonging my state of mind as I'm falling asleep. I like to watch myself, and there's a realm in between that's called hypnagogia. As you're falling asleep, where you're awake, but you're also seeing visions. And every now and then I do that. I get pretty good at it, and I've explored, especially if now and then I get insomniac, very infrequently, but it doesn't bother me because it forces me then to explore my hypnagogic states. And I had wondered, like all the faces and the people that I see, I wonder, they all look like real people. These are not figments of my imagination. And I wonder, am I in another world while I'm in this twilight zone? Who are these people? Sometimes they look at me, and sometimes when they look too closely right at me and they're very close, I wake up because it kind of spooks me. So, but that's just another example of what you're talking about, being on the edge. It's just liminal. This is a big concept that's used. Being on the threshold of a change is the most likely state where these leaps into sudden insight and epiphany take place. It's always on the edge of a new reality, and so on the edge of sleep.
That can be either folded time, or it can be another dimension, or it can be another timeline.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, time is such a mysterious thing. I mean, in this near-death experience, I've had people tell me that they remembered in one instantaneous flash every detail of their lives. And I say to myself, come on. You remember the time that every time you blew your nose? Come on. But I mean, I get the idea. That I've never had this experience of my whole life. Well, I've been exploring it during the pandemic, though, because I've had so much time by myself. I've been recollecting. I'm digging up papers I haven't looked at, books I haven't read, that I have underlined and realized I've forgotten everything, and then digging things up, and it's been feeling like I'm having a kind of a panoramic memory that happens to people when they have near-death experiences. But I'm not near death. But
no.
So I think that these things are possible.
Well, and I think one of you did mention the pandemic, and I've often said I feel that it's the universe giving all of us a time out to rediscover what we really need to do in life. And
a lot of people are feeling that. The unfortunate thing is that what you just said describes some of us. I own my own house. I have enough money to live. I have things to do. I have interesting friends. Things, here I am having an interesting conversation with an interesting woman. You, right? We're in good shape. But I don't say the obvious. People are being wiped out. Everything. Live, 500,000 dead. I don't know what's going on with them. Then, evicted, poverty, craziness. People are going nuts. They can't stand. I mean, I love being by myself. I'm never bored. But other people can handle it. So it's a mixed bag that we're witnessing right now of tragedy and creative potential all lumped together, But it's a strange.
But I really believe that it has, in some ways, been of benefit to humanity. Not the people dying. Don't ever think that. That's just wrong. But it has enabled those that were supposed to start to tap into other aspects and qualities within themselves that they might never have reached to before. I've seen people that have created jobs for themselves and have never been happier. I was retired. This hasn't changed my life. I'm very, very fortunate in that way. But it seems to me that this is also a time for inner reflection. No matter what your situation is, there is always hope inside. We create our reality by our perception of it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you start to perceive your reality in a different way. If you're not happy about something, change your perception, because reality will change in accordance with that. And, we have, I want to kind of make sure I hit Joan of Arc, because she was phenomenal as far as, now here is a real miracle. Here, I can't explain any of this. The voices and the fact that she followed the voices, she did what she was told, and her ending was very, very sad. Makes one wonder if you should really follow the voices.
Right. Yeah. That is a. I mean, that's a story where it seems like the big mind is just using somebody, and the sacrifice, and seems, whether or not she's sacrificed or not. It is a sad story. But then again, if there's another world beyond, and she's, it's not the end.
No.
Yeah, so that's there's some people, I suppose it's their lot to do great things, but it costs them their lives. I mean, Socrates, you remember that interesting story about Socrates. You can't help admiring a man or a woman. I mean, Joan of Arc, for example, the courage to do these extraordinary things, and then to face death with serenity. I mean, Joan could have lied her way out of her death, and so could Socrates, easily. Socrates had loads of friends. He refused. He said, look, if I go against the state, then I'm guilty of subverting the validity of our way of life. And I personally, don't agree with that, because the state can make a mistake, and you have to fight against injustice. But at any rate, Socrates serenely went to his death, and that is because he didn't want to lie, to be true to himself. And many people have done that. And Bruno, he could have escaped the being burnt at the stake easily. All he had to do is BS his way out. But he told the truth, his truth. And then he said, as they were about to light the flames underneath him, he said, "You're more afraid than I am." In other words, he was going to his death with a kind of joy and a sense of triumph. So, yeah, life is strange. Very strange.
Well, it is, and yet we have all these wonderful examples through time. And, you went way back to, not the beginning, but you went back as far as you could to pick up miracles. And I suspect you probably had a lot more than you actually put in the book.
Oh, God. There's a fragment, just a few pieces. I have so much material. I could triple that book in size, and I would think in interest. But I mean, I've got other things that I'm working on, and but you're right. There's an enormous amount of material out there, and the nice thing is that the internet now makes books accessible in a way. I mean, and not only books, but people's experiences. There's all kinds of stuff. Some of it is, maybe a little less valuable and credible, but I keep finding things. There's in a moment, a time when I can never say that I've run out of material. There's
I would think not.
Yeah, there's a great deal there.
Your book is The Smile of the Universe, and basically we are all creations of a higher source. So in a way, we are miracles too, and science hasn't yet, to my satisfaction, proved how humanity, as we are today, actually came to be on this planet. So, if an even bigger miracle is, did we evolve here, or were we planted here? And then, of course, the question is by who, by what, by why. So,
right.
You know, we have miracles.
You're perfectly right. The origin of life itself is one of the mysteries. The origin of consciousness. Here's one point where mainstream scientists and philosophers are compelled to admit that they are baffled, and that is the problem of consciousness. Some guy, an Australian philosopher, wrote a book about the hard problem, consciousness. Well, heck, you know, a lot of people knew that before, but the hard problem, meaning how does this intangible, mysterious phenomenon of consciousness, which is not physical, emerge out of a physical brain? That you know, my own conclusion is that the brain does not produce consciousness; it merely transmits it. That the consciousness is there to begin with, and then in other words, there's one mind, one consciousness, and our bodies, each person, each embodied person, is a manifestation or a reflection of the one light of consciousness, the one ultimate life-giving reality. And so at the bottom of our nature, we're all one. I mean, there is a sense of that, and I mean, and I think that's one of the great values of the mystical experience, the sense of oneness, of not only the oneness with other people, but with all living forms, and even with the natural world. And to have that to be blessed with that feeling of unity it comes from the fact that we are all at bottom rooted in the same mysterious energy. I like that term of our consciousness, of a kind of a cosmic consciousness. How far it reaches into the universe, I don't know, but at least it makes sense to talk about, you know, the planetary mind. That there's one mind here on this planet. And
well, when you look at out-of-body experiences where people have been proclaimed dead and been able to have been watching people during an operation that they were a part of. And I mean, that to me says, okay, that which I identify as me inside me, it means that this physical body is an avatar for a spiritual essence that has no physicality. And and therefore, you know, once this physical body is gone, my essence will be able to go and do whatever it wants to do. So, I mean, that's a miracle. Once you understand once you understand that you are not your physical body, you are a spirit that is riding in that physical body. Once you come to that, then it's kind of like I think I interviewed some people that had near-death experiences, and one young lady who had committed suicide or tried to was talking about how she floated, and she said, I wasn't surrounded by light, I wasn't supported by light or love. She said, I was love. You have to understand you become love when you're not in the physical anymore. And that is such a profound statement that you know, it took my breath away when she said it. And I think that
you know, I was going to say that the near-death experience is undoubtedly, in my mind, one of the most interesting psychological phenomena. I mean, and we owe it to the fact that we have this fancy resuscitation technology nowadays, so that we can prevent people, we can catch people on the edge of death itself, and then stop them so that they get peaks, and then we bring them back, and we get these stories. So I agree that this is listening to these near-death experiences is quite amazing, and
well, I don't know I don't know who's in charge, but whoever figured out that if you gave a scientist a near-death experience, it would validate the whole process, and that's what they did. I mean, there was a surgeon that was certified dead, and he came back and he told one whopping story. So, it kind of gave greater validation to the fact that this indeed does happen. And,
right. There are a number of neuroscientists who have had near-death experiences and changed their whole way of looking at the world. And so it would be nice to figure out a way to induce a near-death, the quality of the experience without actually risking death. But that, I suppose, is what the shamans and the mystics and the yogis do. They train their bodies, they fast, they meditate, they go into solitude, they hide out in caves, they cut themselves off from physical reality and withdraw as deeply into their own conscious selves as they can, and that's when the enlightenment is more likely to come. So,
They call it practicing dying, and it's brutal what it does to their bodies, and yet the enlightenment that they get from it is so amazing to them as an individual. Can they do anything with it? No, but they're in a magical place inside of themselves that is just so blissful that it's worth all the sacrifice. It's not even, they don't even question the sacrifice. It's like, this is how I get to that place inside of me, and I'm going there. And then of course you have those bodies that never deteriorate, that are of the highly evolved yogis and everything, that they just they never deteriorate. Their bodies just stay exactly as they were when they died.
Well, they don't necessarily do that. Yeah, it's not necessarily forever, but I mean, in some instances, there have been incorrupt bodies that have lasted for hundreds of years. Some of them will last a while, and then the decay sets in. So it's not an absolute thing. But again, it's completely hard to understand why the bodies of holy people, yogis, saints, or whatever, seem to behave differently than the ordinary folk when they die. It's another one of those real puzzles, and it's almost as though the holy or highly evolved person's body is unconsciously being used as a symbol. And it's saying, look, you see, I'm supposed to be rotten and smelly, but I still smell nice, and my body is intact. And figure that one out, boys and girls.
Well, you have to be grateful for those miracles and those mysteries, because otherwise life would be terribly boring if we knew everything. There would be no point to having a physical reality.
Well, it would not only be boring, it would be horrifying to know that all the evil in the world, there's no hope of compensation, no hidden dimension of a benefit that might be available, at least might be available. It's one of the things about the belief in life after death that I don't understand. Scientists should be interested in that, in the evidence for life after death, because I think there's a moral imperative to think about it. Like if a medicine came along, you knew that was going to prolong life, and you covered it up, that would be a crime, and that would be something unforgivable. Well, why are so few scientists willing to investigate the ultimate healing of death itself, namely the idea that there is a life after death? I mean, I don't get it. Why they resist it? It would, if everybody was absolutely convinced that there was a continuation of their lives after their death, I think we would behave differently. It just, who knows? In the future, we may have technologies that enable us to tune into the other world. Who knows? And that'll change everything when that happens.
Well, I think we have it now. I think that there are people that can do that now. And I think we're at a precipice where there are glimpses into this material, and that people are beginning to bring information through that some of it is fraudulent, some of it is real, and it's up to the individual to determine, which is which.
Right.
But I think
right.
that we're at a time and a place where there's so much potential that's available, and people are beginning to be comfortable with the fact that they can reach and they can stretch and they can go into other realms. Their minds at least, their spirit at least, so that they can bring information and insight and philosophy back. I think we're at a place where we're coming to a time of enlightenment that we haven't seen in many, many generations. I think we're in a revolving pattern that is, we've been here before. But I think we're coming out of what I call the Dark Ages, and we're coming into a time of enlightenment that we'll probably have for hundreds of years, maybe thousands. But more and more and more, we're opening up to a lot of the potential that's out there. I just noticed the time. We've talked our way through 2 hours. Do you believe that?
All right. Okay. Yeah, I agree. I think that we are on. There's a lot. I mean, I wrote a piece recently, a post on. The question is, no, I haven't published it yet. Poised for Renaissance, and a lot of people are thinking along those lines. That, and historically, it's been true that people who have, after pandemics in the past, there have been cultural renewals. And I wrote something about the Italian Renaissance was preceded by the Black Death, which made all kinds of changes in Europe that were positive. So maybe that's what's going to happen with us now. And that would be a good way to end our conversation on that optimistic note.
Yes, sir. Now, do you have a website you want to send people to?
Oh, well, yeah, I have a blog, and I have an art website. But don't you have that material? I mean, my blog, I'll email it to you.
Okay. I'll get it in the write-up for the show. But I want to thank you so very much. This has been such an enlightening show, and I look forward to working with you again. Yeah,
it's very interesting, and I would like to talk to you at some time about these podcasts. I mean, this is a podcast that we've just recorded, right?
This is a podcast, yes.
Right.
Be happy to do that with you, and I'll get in touch with you, and we'll do that. So I want to thank you. I'm going to have to rush before they cut me off here. I want to thank everybody for listening. Do check into the YouTube channel and to the Rumble channel as well, and make sure you select either follow or subscribe, because that's the only way we know you're listening. I want to thank everybody for being here. Do tune in tomorrow night. Mark Eddy has a really great show lined up, and, of course, next week. So have a great evening, everybody. Stay well, stay healthy, and stay out of trouble. Good night now.